Welcome to the K20 Center's Zoom into Your Career video series. These online career expos give students a way to explore many interesting careers and learn about their career options from volunteer professionals. Megan McManus works at Leggett Platt, a manufacturing company teaching employees to use new technologies and tools in fun and exciting ways. She breaks down complicated processes into simple steps so that everyone at the company can learn them.
Hi, everyone. We're so glad to have you join our Zoom into Your Career Expo. Megan is here with us. She is an IT trainer, and her job is to explore new technologies, design fun and engaging ways to teach others how to use them, and get employees excited about using new tools. So welcome, Megan. I am going to turn it over to her to talk about her career.
Hi everyone, my name is Megan McManus, and like Jamie said, I am an IT trainer at a large manufacturing company called Leggett Platt, which is a big bedding and furniture manufacturer that's based in Carthage, Missouri, but I work out of my home in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So today we are going to explore the position of IT trainer. So I'm going to give you just a moment to read this job description on your own. So most of my workday is spent doing instructional design, which is essentially applying adult learning concepts to instructional materials, online courses, activities, information resources, evaluating the training, and creating job aids. So I simplify and document complicated work processes, but I also aid in the adoption of technology, which is people at a company or organization learning new tools and starting to use them. So I'm really responsible for helping not only introduce them to the new tools, but also to change their behavior so they actually start using them. So I, as part of my adoption and aiding in those new technologies, I often find myself tapping into my marketing background so I can market these trainings to the employees. So let's talk a little bit about what my day-to-day looks like. So in my day-to-day responsibilities, a lot of what I do is creating documentation. So when you get a new computer program or a new piece of hardware and you have instructions, a lot of work went into creating those instructions and making them as simple and precise as possible so that you don't have any extra information that you don't need and you have all the information you need there. It's also really important to write this documentation as if anyone could open it. So a lot of times in IT, as the IT trainer, I'm the layman coming in and helping interpret, from what a really techie person has told me about a program, and I have to interpret it for someone that maybe doesn't use a computer every day even. Another part of my responsibility is meetings. A lot of live trainings. I spend a lot of time on Zoom all day. Another thing I do is I end up doing a lot of technical support. So I don't have an IT background, but just as an IT trainer, I become the face of a program. So I not only learn the program in learning how to teach it, but I also end up supporting it after the fact a lot of the time too. So another thing I do, I am responsible for measuring the success of training. So the difference between training and teaching is more conceptual. Training, I'm trying to teach someone how to do something hands-on, which makes it really easy to measure. And especially training people on digital tools, I have analytics, so I can see how many people signed up for something. I can see how many people are actually using the new tools they have. And I also am responsible for designing different ways to measure that throughout the process. So speaking of measuring is a huge part of training. The difference between teaching and training is really in a work environment, you have to prove that your training worked. So at the end of every day or at the end of every quarter, someone is saying, what did Megan do that provided actual, tangible business results, whether that was we were able to get rid of something that wasn't being used, or we were able to get our money's worth out of something else we're using, or was that the right solution altogether? Sometimes I find out that we may have trained on something and it wasn't really a training problem. Maybe it was too complicated of a process for people to adopt in the first place. So another part of my day-to-day is answering questions. I answer questions all day, and I end up consulting with a lot of other people in my organization about how they might train their teams on technology. So that looks like everything from how to install apps on your smartphone all the way to productivity hacks around storing your files and MFA. So another thing I do in my IT role is I spend a lot of time working with leadership. The reason for this is I'm often consulted on how we might roll something out to a large group of people. I also have the responsibilities of working with our leadership to make sure that they're trained so that they're prepared to use the technology so their employees can begin to use it. And finally, I do a lot of actual training. So of course, with the pandemic, most of that is virtual, but doing IT training, there's no better way to show someone how to use technology than to walk them through the technology itself. So let's talk about some skills that are needed for truly after the pandemic. I would say most of the day, people are coming to me with problems and I have to figure out how to solve them, whether I'm trying to figure out how to use a tool we already have in a new way. Sometimes I have to find a new tool, or sometimes we just don't have a solution for that and we have to figure out how to make do with what we have. So I love that part of my job, absolute favorite part of my job. I would say just working in IT in general, creative problem solving is a huge part of that job. So if you're someone who likes having problems and fixing them, this is the career for you. Otherwise, I would also say you also have to be very adaptable. So at the start of the pandemic, we have about 20,000 employees and none of us were working online. So I'm the sole IT trainer at my company. So I had to be extremely adaptable to help people get online in a very short amount of time. Some other skills that you need to have for this career are organization. I manage tons of projects all over the place. I would not say that's my natural ability, but this is a job. If you're someone who loves staying organized and counting someone a new tool, sometimes I have people that are like, this is awesome, I can't wait to learn it. But other times I have people who don't like new technology or flat out won't use it. So a lot of times I'm finding myself kind of selling people on what they're using. So I not only have to explain to them what's in it for the company, I have to explain what's in it for them. And I have to really convince them that it's worth their time and effort to learn this new tool and to start using it. I would say the other skill you need in this role is patience and friendliness. So if you have had any frustration on any of your Zoom calls for school, that is basically my whole job. So you have to learn how to not only be patient and friendly as a natural reaction, but also you're often dealing with people who are frustrated. I get the same way. I get frazzled about technology. So you have to really quickly be able to diffuse the situation, get on people's levels, and help them calmly navigate through issues. Some other skills you might need include excellent written communication skills, video editing, graphic design, information mapping, which is like you might do outlines for your papers in 8th and 9th grade right now. Information mapping is basically taking information and putting it into legible chunks like you'd see in your textbook, like your science textbook, for example, how there's tables and charts and visuals worked into it. A lot of my job is taking not interesting data and presenting it in a way that's really easy to see and see the important and interesting parts. So let's talk about the education needed. So there are a lot of different ways to find your way to training, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about my specific path to training a little bit later in the session. So education needed. Most training jobs require a master's degree or want you to have a master's degree eventually. If you are someone that wants to continue in your career in training and development, or if you want to dive into cybersecurity, most of the time you need a master's degree. So in order to start working in training, you have a lot of different paths. You could study education, you could study online education, you could study training and development, you could study human resources. I personally studied human resource development, which is talent development and leadership development combined. So that's the HR side of training. And at a lot of companies, training sits under HR. In my specific job, I work in IT, but I still work with HR a lot because there's a lot of overlap between the things we're trying to train and communicate to all the employees. So there are a lot of options for education. I would recommend, if this is a job you're interested in, to go ahead and get involved in LinkedIn. I think having a LinkedIn is probably one of the best things you could do to stand out as you're going into college, but there are tons of amazing training and development resources on there. It's a great way to see the many, many ways people find their way to this career path. Let's talk about adjacent professions. So I mentioned there's a lot of paths to training and development. I personally have a journalism degree. So it's not necessarily how you got there, but it's more the experience you have that lends you to that. So in training, transferable skills are a really big deal. You have to wear a lot of hats. You need to be able to be a good writer. You have to be a good manager. You have to be a good project manager. So here are some other jobs that you might look at if this job sounds interesting to you. So you could be a cybersecurity instructor, a training and development professional. So you could train people on soft skills like communication or diversity inclusion. You could also work as a technology adoption specialist. The team I'm on at my work is actually a technology adoption team, and it consists of writers and other collaboration tool specialists. You could also study instructional design, and there's a lot of demand for that career right now with the pandemic. I would say that is one of the few careers that is booming during the pandemic. You could also manage a learning management system. So an LMS, like you might use Canvas Canvas or Blackboard for school, or maybe even Microsoft Teams for education. There is a whole job where you just manage that tool and you teach other people how to adapt their content for it. You could also be a technical writer. So a lot of the jobs that I do is writing. If you are someone who likes to write, but not necessarily creative writing, more explaining processes, technical writing is a job you might consider as well. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how I found my way into IT training. So I took the path less traveled, very non-traditional path. So I studied journalism and I wanted to be a journalist, but I graduated at the peak of the recession, which was, about 10 years ago, and I didn't really know what I was going to do when I got into the workforce. So here is how I found my way to training. I had a journalism degree. I worked in communications and marketing for the city of Tulsa as a public servant. I got pretty bored with that, so I started a freelance writing company, and I started working for marketing agencies. And from that, I was able to work my way into marketing agencies where I worked on social media and video editing. Eventually, I got some jobs at some other marketing agencies selling marketing services. I started training other people to sell marketing services. So we call this in the training and development industry, we call it an accidental trainer, how you found your way into it. I fell in love with it. I shifted my side hustle from writing to training and development. I quit my day job. I went back to school at age 30 and got my master's degree. And now I find myself in a position I love in IT training. So if you have one takeaway from my presentation today, I hope it is that you have plenty of time to figure this stuff out. Stick with subjects you like. You're not supposed to have your whole life figured out when you're 18. This was a job I didn't even know existed until I was in my late 20s. Even a few years ago, the job I have today didn't exist. I'm the first person at my organization to have ever held it. So just stick with what you love, find a few subjects you're really passionate about, work on those skills that transfer, like being able to write or communicate well, and you will have a lot of options. And as you'll see after this pandemic, I bet a lot of adults in your life are going to make happiness-driven career changes. I would say that's what mine was too. So working for full-service marketing agencies my entire career helped me to learn a lot of the basics that I needed for this, and it helped me learn the business world. So it's not necessarily, even when you change careers when you're a little older, you won't necessarily have to start from square one. Every job you have, you'll learn skills that you can take to the next one. So something I would recommend if this is something you're interested in, ATD is an organization, it's an Association for Talent Development. That is probably the #1 international organization around training. That's a great place to find a lot of free content around what a trainer does. So there's a lot of books as well. There are a lot of training programs, obviously, outside of any graduate programs you do as well. So let's talk about school subjects that you might want to pay attention to if you are interested in IT training. So you may want to pay attention to English. If you have the option to take a journalism class or a multimedia journalism class, you're going to have to use a lot of skills around video editing to create video projects. Yearbook, if you want to do graphic design, or if you're able to take a Photoshop or other Adobe Illustrator class. Really, your writing skills and your design skills are going to be some of the most important for this career. Salary information. I know this is what everyone wants to know. So don't make the mistake I did. and go to school and get a major that you're really excited about, and then go to apply for jobs and realize you never looked at how much that job pays before you spent tons of money on college for it. So a median entry-level salary for an instructional designer or a technology trainer is about $65,000 a year. But if you were to specialize in a niche, or if you were to creep into learning development territory, which is like development, like computer development, that range is more from $65,000 to $110,000 a year. So when you work in higher education, like doing this kind of job that I have at higher education, it tends to pay the least. And those who work for larger companies or lead teams that create IT training for end users or customers, like if you worked at HubSpot and you created the training on people who are the end users of HubSpot, those are the positions that command the highest salary. So why did I choose training? I've always felt like I had the ability to spot potential in others and make them aware of it, which is what drew me to training and development in the first place, because I really feel like it's one of those jobs where you can get paid and make people's lives better. And I do think in training and development, you have the opportunity to teach people skills that make them better in and outside of work. So obviously it's a little bit of a stretch to say that for IT, but I do feel like I help people better prepare for their jobs. I get a lot of good feedback from people that knowing how to use the tools they have at work better helps them be better at work, which is great. And like I said, my favorite part of my role is solving problems, but my least favorite part of my job is the one I wanted to share with you the most, which is not really my least favorite part, probably the hardest part of my job. So in IT, we often try to break things. I come from an atmosphere where you come up with new ideas and everyone tells you what a good special job you did. In IT, it's the total opposite. So we can't release any new products until they're fully vetted. So we're always thinking of what are the consequences of my decisions, what could go wrong. So if you are someone that doesn't like confrontation, this job will be a little hard for you, but this is a muscle you can flex. It's really hard to get and receive criticism, and that's something you get better at as you get into your career anyways. But I would say that the hardest part of this job for me is that you really have to take accountability. You have to point out problems right away. You have to point out mistakes and problems that other people have made, and you have to be really humble about it and ready to receive feedback. So some of the things that implement a risk culture, which is something you'd experience if you worked in IT, is, you have to be ready to escalate as soon as problems arrive. You have to always tell the truth. You have to say, hey, I messed something up. That's a little bit different vibe from that you may have in other workplaces. You're really encouraged to fail, and that failure is seen as adding to the success of our group. So you have to be able to take responsibility, and you also have to have strong, open communication, which includes giving critical feedback when it's necessary. So in my field, for training professionals, employers are often looking for a Swiss Army knife employee who can do tons of different tasks related to instructional design and training. It's not really my job as the IT trainer to know the technology, and I think in some cases it actually benefits me to learn something from scratch so I can approach it with a beginner's mindset. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about employment prospects for this career, and that is that IT training is in high demand following the pandemic. It's one of the few careers, especially if you venture into instructional design where you might be working with universities, there is tons of demand for this. I would say that this role has tons of possibilities, especially in line with cybersecurity. So cybersecurity in helping our cyber threat team communicate training initiatives across the company is a huge part of my job, and that's going to continue to be a bigger and bigger deal for companies and schools and all sorts of organizations. So does anyone have any questions for me?
Thank you, Megan. That presentation was amazing and packed with so much useful information. I think you covered most of the questions that students usually ask, but I'll add a few just to cover our bases. So you mentioned having to deal with conflict, and as a trainer, I'm sure that you're really automatically seen as a leader, right? When you're dealing with that conflict, when you're doing your trainings. So How do you also deal with failure? Like if you try something with a group and it doesn't work, what do you do?
That's a great question. So in my job, I'm very lucky that I have data. So I love data. Data helps you tell the true story of what's happening. So in my job, a lot of times I do smaller tests on smaller groups of people to get feedback. So that usually starts with all my colleagues in IT who are extremely critical, and then I'll move into some other parts of the business where I'm looking for critical feedback. So I wouldn't say that it's a failure as much as everything I do in training is iterative. So I try something out, I see what works, what didn't, I try the stuff that worked, add some new stuff to it, try it on a new group. So even when I was starting to train our employees on teams, I trained people 30 at a time, I recorded myself, I got feedback from them, and I continue to adjust my training. So nothing in IT is ever done. There's a concept of minimum viable product, which is a concept that you're always having something out there and you're just continuing to improve on it. So instead of waiting until something is all the way done, you have the best version available ready at all times. And that train of thought kind of helps you think of things not in failure, but every failure is an opportunity to do something a little bit better.
That's an amazing growth mindset. Yes. And students can translate that to all of their work, right? Things that they're working on in school, to relationships, friendships. It's all about growing from what you've done. So good, thank you. One other question for me would be, what if students are just very frustrated with technology in their day-to-day life? Say, like your presentation was amazing, right? It looks super cool with all the sticky notes and the information. But what if students don't have that comfortable connection with technology where they're just constantly frustrated? What advice would you give them?
That's a great question. I bump into that a lot. Like I said, I bump into people when they are often at their most frazzled, or maybe they're frustrated because they just learned something new and now they have to learn something new all over again. I would say take a deep breath and don't necessarily rely on the resources that your school gives you to tell you how to use stuff. So I would say my number one strength as an IT professional is that I am willing to figure something out on my own, and I find that that makes me really valuable in my organization, because even if I don't know the answer, I can find out. So especially when it comes to technology, I recommend that you check out, like if you're trying to learn Photoshop, for example, Adobe has tons of resources on how to use Photoshop. Another free tool that I really like is called CatCat, CAT.com. And particularly around training and development and technology, there's tons of trainings that other professional trainers have created and shared with the public for free.
Thank you. Yeah, I have felt that technology struggle. I remember it from when I was a student and from when I was a teacher. So thank you for that advice. Alex wants to know, you talked about recording yourself. Can you talk a little bit about how that has been helpful to you? That's something that people can feel really vulnerable doing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So something I try to remind myself all the time, because I'm teaching other people, is you basically feel weird all the time. You feel weird when you're on camera. You feel weird when you're teaching other people stuff. You're always thinking, what are other people thinking of me? But you have to remember everyone else is doing that too. So we're our own harshest critics. Recording yourself is actually a trick I learned from sales. So I used to be on sales calls and I'd record myself and I'd listen back to it. So this is the same tip someone would give you if you got involved in Toastmasters or any other kind of public speaking. You can be a great judge of your own character. You just have to have that data, that unfiltered data. So watching yourself, watching it back, it's cringeworthy. I still hate it. Even if I did my best job ever, I would still hate it. But I know that other people appreciate me putting myself out there. Other people know how hard it is for me to put myself out there and do training things. And even though it comes more naturally to me, it is a muscle you have to reflect, or you have to flex constantly and work on. I would just say you got to just push through the discomfort and just keep focused on, I'm doing this to make myself better, and not be too hard on yourself.
Definitely. All right. So last question for me, unless my two co-hosts have any other questions, would be, what hobbies or skills could students, hobbies could they get involved in, do, or skills could they develop starting right now? Maybe outside of just general classes, things that they could do for fun, that they could practice to prepare for a career in IT specifically.
I would say volunteering is probably the number one thing I do outside of work that helps me prepare for my work. So not only am I IT support staff for my entire family, whether I wanted to be or not before I worked in IT, but also I am a big with big brothers, big sisters, and I feel like mentoring young people has been instrumental in helping me better relate to somebody from a different background, communicate simply, learn another perspective. But I also volunteer with other organizations. So when I was in high school, I volunteered with Key Club, I volunteered with Lab Rescue. You could work with organizations that you're passionate about to design flyers, or maybe education on how to volunteer. I guarantee your church or your community organization, everybody has a need for additional training stuff. There are tons of templates online on like canva.com where you can start to dip your toes into developing instructional data.
That's amazing. And those are connections that we wouldn't often think about, right? That those sorts of volunteer opportunities can be really helpful when you reach your the job world, your career. So thank you so much, Megan. This presentation has been wonderful, and we can't wait to share it with our schools. So we will let you go. Thank you for being our speaker.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye, everybody.